Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook. Again, cover to cover. This is the second textbook I'm reading, and this book is from 1940. That's right, before World War II. And it's called Pioneers and Patriots, and it's written as Catholic school propaganda. And that's okay. 1940, mind you. So actually kind of interesting in the sense of it's inclusive in the sense of admitting the wrongs in history, kind of before you'd expect the wrongs to be admitted in American history. Obviously, some things they have not admitted, but some things they do, which is good. Okay, so here we are, The Birth of Our Nation. This is chapter 6, and this is section 4 or 3? I don't remember. Breaking with England. Oh, this is important. The Boston Massacre. Dislike of the British was growing in America. The feeling against England was very bitter in Massachusetts. 2 regiments of British troops had been sent to Boston. These soldiers acted like conquerors. The people of Boston became more bitter. Finally, one day they came to a real clash between the British troops and the townspeople. This fight was called the Boston Massacre. The cruel killing of people who are able to defend themselves is called a massacre. Who are not able to defend themselves is called a massacre. Several Americans were killed. This was too much for the colonists. Leaders who were thoughtful men began to assume direction of the colonists. 3 strong leaders. For leaders of freedom, men like Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, James Otis began to guide the thinking and the activities of the colonists. Samuel Adams and James Otis were about the same age. Both had studied at Harvard College. Both of these men were interested in political questions. Many related to the government and said to be political because politics is the art and science of government. Men who are active in directing government are able to be sometimes called politicians. Early in the quarrel between England and the colonies, both James Otis and Samuel Adams began to show leadership. James Otis made many splendid speeches. He encouraged the colonists to resist all unfair laws passed by the British Parliament. He was called... What was he called? He was called a rebel because he defied the government. All colonists who opposed the English were rebels. Otis was very much against one particular thing that the British did. The English had been very stern about collecting taxes on certain goods coming into the country. Such goods are called imports. The colonists often tried to evade the import tax. This was done by bringing in goods secretly. This act was called smuggling. It is dishonest to smuggle anything into a country and thus avoid paying tax. The English determined to stop the smuggling. The king's officers were writs of assistance. Written orders were called writs, and the WRITS, writs of assistance, gave the English officers the authority to enter any house and search for smuggled goods. The protest of Otis. James Otis was a gifted speaker. He made speeches protesting against the writs of assistance. He declared that a man's home is his castle. He probably talked like an American, though. A man's home is his castle. The speech made a deep impression on all who heard it. One man remarked that, "Then and there American independence was born. Then and there, American independence was born." Samuel Adams was strongly influenced by the attitude of James Otis. Adams had advised the colonists not to buy goods made in England while the Stamp Act was in force. Many people followed the advice of Adams. The British merchants soon found that their goods would not sell in the colonies. It was British merchants who forced Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act. New taxes. King George III of England was very angry about the repeal of the Stamp Act. George III was a very stubborn man, but he was not a very wise ruler. He made very bad mistake when he determined to make the colonists obey his royal will. The new tax was placed on certain goods imported into the colonies. A special tax was placed on lead, glass, paint, and tea. Samuel Adams rose up in a great protest against this new tax. He advised his colonists to not buy any of those articles which were taxed, no matter how much they thought they needed them. Tea sent to Boston. And trust your inclination. I think you know where we're going with this. Several shiploads of tea had been sent to Boston. The English tea merchants made the price of tea very low. Even with the tax, the tea was cheaper in America than in England. This was done because the king wished to trick the colonists into buying the tea and paying the tax. Samuel Adams heard of the arrival of the tea. He sent a guard to see that the tea was not unloaded at the Boston wharf. Several meetings were held to decide what should be done. The colonists in other cities to which the tea had been sent said that the tea must be shipped back to England. The matter was not to be settled so easily in Boston. A meeting was held in the Old South Church. The representatives of 6 towns attended. They resolved that the tea should be sent back to England. The tea merchants by this time were willing enough to take the tea back to England. The royal governor at Boson refused to allow the tea to return to England. He felt that this would be a sign of weakness because it would be giving in to the colonists. The royal governor believed that the will of the king must be enforced. The Boston Tea Party. The matter was finally settled in a most unpleasant manner. A party of 60 men dressed as Indians marched through the streets of Boston one night. They hurried down to Griffin's Wharf. Here 3 ships loaded with tea were docked. The men shattered open the 342 chests of tea. All the tea was hastily thrown overboard. This was a most unjust act because the tea which was destroyed belonged to the English merchants. The colonists had no quarrel with these merchants. Their quarrel was with the king and Parliament. This thoughtless act took place in 1773, is often called the Boston Tea Party. It was the beginning of the fight against the English government. A fight against the established government is a rebellion. Very interesting how this book is moralizing the Boston Tea Party, saying that this was an unjust act done by the colonists, throwing it overboard, which is, at some level true. It's not fair to the merchants. The merchants are just trying to earn a buck. But I just think it's interesting. It's an American history textbook, and it's saying that it was wrong. Whatever. Committees of correspondence. Samuel Adams realized that there was only one way to resist the harsh English laws. The Americans must be united. They must think and act together. The first thing to do was to let people know exactly what was happening. Someone or some group had to take over the job of spreading news. A committee of correspondence was formed in Boston by Samuel Adams. This committee sent newsletters by special messenger to all nearby towns. Soon this idea spread to the committees of correspondence were formed in all colonies. The Americans began to feel a bond of union. Committee of Correspondence. I kind of like the ring of that for it sounds like a really serious news program. You could call the Committee of Correspondence. But I can just have that as a segment on the Context is Everything Media Network, where I talk about current day issues. Committee of Correspondence. The Americans began to feel a bond of unity. They knew that there was going to be in the colonies. The first step was to unite. Okay, when small group of colonists met in a picture, the subjects talked about were the bad English laws. Another good leader. The American colonists had another splendid leader in Benjamin Franklin. During the French and Indian War, he advised the colonists to unite. Franklin's advice was great valued as they quarreled between the English governments and the colonists grew bitter. Great patriot. Benjamin Franklin's greatest work was done in the dark days when the colonists were fighting England. Franklin was an old man by the time the Congress sent him to ask France to aid the American colonies. He made a long trip in a sailing vessel. He remained in France for some time. The picture shows Franklin standing before the throne of the King of France. I mean, obviously it's a dramatization, but a picture nonetheless. This book is from 1940. 1940. 40. That's right. It was partly through Franklin's efforts that France helped American colonies. France sent money, guns, ships, and men to help the Americans fight against the English. Benjamin Franklin lived to be 84 years of age. His useful life did not end until he had the happiness of seeing America free from English rule. Thank you for listening. God bless. And have a good day. Or a good evening. A good week. Or a good weekend. Depending on when you watch this.